Welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. We're living in an energy peak moment on the planet. We've based our whole modern world on cheap oil and gas, giving us automobiles and airplanes, millions of plastic products, the fertilizer that boosts our agricultural production. Many observers believe that we'll soon be at the peak of our global oil production, what's called peak oil, within just a few years. From that point, oil production will decline, but our demand is soaring, and we don't have any easy replacements to fill that gap. Even if we did, it takes us decades to build new energy infrastructures. Peak Moment is exploring our community responses and individual responses to this changing energy future. My guests today have just come back from the Katrina aftermath, but before we hear from them, let's get our energy news from Rick Hartman. Rick?
Thanks, Janaea. Today's lead story, the Willits, California City Council voted unanimously last Wednesday to start the process of converting the city's major operations to solar power. This will start a three-stage planning process funded by that vote. The cost for the loans for what could be as large as a 677 kilowatt system would be much less than the $300,000 Willits pays PG&E for power every year. After the loans are paid, their power will be essentially free. Way to go, Willits. Next, in Richmond, California, Councilwoman Gail McLaughlin has launched the Solar Richmond Project, a nonprofit group who wants to create 5 megawatts of power there by 2010. That's enough power for 5,000 homes. Patagonia has installed 66.6 kilowatts of solar power for a system they say will allow their Ventura, California headquarters to become energy self-sufficient. In Los Angeles, American Apparel installed 146 kilowatts of solar to reduce their power bill by 20% this year. American Apparel is one of the few remaining clothing companies that actually make clothing here and not in China or elsewhere, employing 3,000 people in an 800,000 square foot facility. In Rohnert Park, California, a new 200-acre village with 1.4 megawatts of solar power will soon be ready for people to move in. There will be 2,000 residential units and a high-tech business park. Workers will be able to live and walk in that community. To continue motivating the installation of solar PV in California, the California Public Utilities Commission has approved their own version of the Million Solar Rooftops bill that died in the legislature last summer. This funds $3.2 billion in rebates over the next 11 years, serving over 2 million people. In international news, Sweden has formally declared its intent to be fossil fuel free by 2020. China has recently made an agreement with Saudi Arabia for the purchase of oil and natural gas. China has also made agreements with Canada to buy oil from the tar sands there. I hope there's some left for us. In farm news, farmers in Kansas are saying that the cost of natural gas is forcing them to abandon irrigation. It now costs them $35 an acre to irrigate. When you have a farm of 4,000 acres, that's a lot of money. You can do the math. If farmers can't afford to grow food, how can we afford to eat? That's all the news that we have for tonight. Now back to Janaea and this week's guests.
Thanks, Rick. My guests tonight are Renette Senum, Bo Bangert, and Alan Stoller, who've all come back from different journeys to the Katrina aftermath. Renette came, let's see, you were there in Thanksgiving time and Christmas time, right? And so we want to hear your story first, and then we'll hear from Alan and Bo, who were there just in December. No, just here in January, right?
That's right.
Different experiences, different purposes. So why did you go to Katrina, and what did you discover there?
Well, originally I went because last May I put together what's called a town hall conference on peak oil, and this year I'm doing another town hall conference on climate change, and I really wanted to put a face on climate change and how it's affecting people who've done nothing different than what we've done. So I went there with a video camera with a Southern Baptist group and spent a week mucking out houses and removing debris from homes and
Just for a
so
second,
on.
how does Katrina have anything to do with global climate change? Give us the
Well,
capsule.
it's of course, burning all this fossil fuel and so on, and we are changing our atmosphere, and unfortunately, it is compounding the hurricane seasons. So, we are not creating hurricanes, but we're compounding and making them larger and more destructive.
Right. My understanding is that our global warming is heating up the water, which makes them more ferocious.
Exactly, changing the Atlantic Ocean and the currents.
So go on. What did you discover?
Well, when I went there, by that time I had traveled to 50 countries, many of them, third world and warring, and I was floored by the level of destruction and the large swath of destruction. I did discover that it was about the size of England, the country of England, that was destroyed. It's a very huge area, and then also just the level of destruction as far as the ocean swell that came in, the tidal swell that was 25 to 40 feet high, and of course these old 300-year-old southern homes that survived the Civil War were just completely just wiped out into splinters, and in Hancock County in Mississippi, which received the eye of the storm, had these 40-foot high tidal surges, as well as 200-mile-an-hour hurricane winds, as well as 40 tornadoes in one county. So I was amazed by the enormity of it. So I went back second time.
Once wasn't enough.
Once wasn't enough, and to film some more. And as soon as I got there, I was just there with the camera with no appointments, nothing, just going there to just kind of see what story would unfold before me. And as soon as I got off the plane, I immediately was hooked up with an animal rescuer, and that really took me on a completely different path. And I didn't realize that right now there's between 15 to 40,000 abandoned animals, cats and dogs. They're roaming through New Orleans and Mississippi and so on, and are literally starving to death. And they are now having kittens and puppies. So they're coming in batches. It's just exponentially getting worse with the animal situation.
What can be done? I mean, what are people doing, or what is happening with them?
First of all, there needs to be more media attention on this, because even the disease for the cats and dogs is just rapidly getting worse. But they need money. They need lots of volunteers to go down there, just to go to these different areas where we're just trying to put fresh food and water out for these starving animals that might just get this food maybe once a week at the most. Really? So then we can get some trappers there, which we've been doing, and trying to trap them and either find their owners or get them a good home. But a lot of these facilities and shelters that sprung up after the hurricane, the funding, of it is, good, donorship and so on, is being pulled away. So a lot of them are closing shop, and we keep saying, well, if we capture these animals, we are able to trap them. Where do we bring them? Where do we take them?
Right. I would imagine if we have a chance, I hope we get to see a little footage of what you. So anytime they can show it to us. What's the response of the people to the animals and to their own situation? What did you find?
Well, the people living there, a lot of them are very apologetic. They keep saying, we didn't know. We didn't know we were going to be gone for so long. We didn't know the storm was going to be so terrible. So they're very apologetic, but there's also a very different mentality in the South. I mean, there's already a lot of feral cats and dogs anyway, and most of them are not neutered and spayed. So now they're having all these puppies. But unfortunately, one of the things that is coming out now of this domino effect is a lot of people are shooting them because the dogs are running in packs now. So people are shooting them. There's unfortunately cats coming in with arrows through them, hundreds of buckshot. I mean, it's a bad situation. So they really need people to either, if you can't go down there, then perhaps help in the transportation of animals, help setting up with the local shelter of bringing in animals, cats and dogs, and facilitating and finding homes for them. So even if you can't go there, or perhaps if you're an employer, you have a bunch of employees, you'll pay for their week of vacation and send them off or pay for their airline ticket to go help and volunteer.
My guess is, well, you were part of a group that was your first trip.
Southern Baptist.
What were they doing there?
We were mucking out homes, cleaning them out, cleaning off the property, and then there was a sawmill that had been donated through this church, and we were actually milling the fallen trees and building 8-by-8 foot shelters to put what few belongings people were able to scrounge from their property, as well as some porches and steps just so people can get off their FEMA trailers so they could get out of the out of the trailers. A lot of them are old and not capable. So it was just really kind of unburying the people, which will take years. It'll take years to unbury the people. That's what's kind of hard to express.
To unbury the people.
Well, I mean,
the
unbury
belongings,
the belongings in the world
possessions
and their
in the-
homes, and it's just so huge. Again, if you think of England being destroyed, and after World War II, for instance, when England was destroyed, they had the whole world coming around to rebuild them, and that's not happening.
That's right. Thank you. Thanks, Renette.
Oh, and so what we have here actually is what you're seeing is the levee. This is one of the levees that was topped over by the water.
That's that light band in the background?
Yes, and this is that's that light band, and this is the part of south of New Orleans. And this was just a neighborhood of homes and towns, and it was all very green, very lush, and
so this was once just suburbia. Is that right?
Suburbia, and now what you're seeing, and I'm just standing in the middle of. This is really rough editing, by the way. We didn't edit this all, just rough footage. But this is, again, a 300-year-old home that survived the Civil War. And this is the neighborhood. And imagine this kind of, territory that goes for about, I think, 100, 150 miles along the coastline of just completely wiped out. So imagine
suburbia flattened.
Suburbia flattened. Gosh. Absolutely. And there's a little area there where they're trying to clean up with cranes and so on. But it's pretty bad.
Thank you. This is astounding. I see the rooted trees. Some
rooted
of them
trees,
made
and
it
see what
through,
you're seeing up there is some
nothing
bark.
that we
There's
built.
bark removed up at the very top, and that shows you the watermark where the water had. And there's a woman actually standing right there by that tree, and that's where the water line was.
You, Alan, and Bo came more recently, and you also talked about the high watermark along the houses that you were working with. Tell us why you went, Bo. Why did you go to, and what did you discover there?
Oh, I discovered that the houses were pretty much all flooded out. So even if your house did survive the pressure winds and all the water that just knocked everything down, you pretty much had a moldy house just left over, and you couldn't really do anything with that.
So the house still might have some walls, but because of the mold, do they have to just tear all that out?
Well, yeah. I think they should. The only way I can think of those houses coming back together is if, you got to take out all the walls pretty much, and just the floors are pretty much the same way. They're just all, it's moldy and gross, and people can't really even live in them. We actually took down a house because it was just. You go inside it and you just smell the mold, and it's just gives you headaches.
Very unhealthy.
Yes.
I mean, you could be very toxic.
It is.
Why did you go to New Orleans?
Oh, to help the people. I was actually just going to volunteer to rebuild. It was a Mexican family that was living in New Orleans.
Cajun.
Cajun, yes.
Cajun family. Thanks, Alan.
And they actually, they really liked what we did for them. And I made friends with them, too. I made some new friends.
Hey, that's great.
Yes.
What did you do for their, was their house flattened, or did you have some new, did you do some new construction?
Oh, no, they had a house still in the air. Mm-hmm. But it like I said, it smelled, and you go inside and everything was just ruined.
So was there any sort of strong memory that you take back, some special moment? You were telling us earlier about some of the elders that you visited.
Oh, yes.
Tell us a story.
All right. Well, in New Orleans, there was a Quaker meeting, and I went with my friend Alan. And there, I said something to the people about raising their spirits and keeping hope, and so we can rebuild their community. And I just wanted them to really reveal themselves there, So they really they were listening, but a guy came up with what he said, and it was really truthful. The people were really just low in their spirits, and they couldn't really imagine being in a high spirit at a time like that, because it's just devastation for everybody.
The whole world they know is devastated, Alan. Mm-hmm. And you, what was the project that you went for, and what did you discover?
Well, it was really, as Bo said, there was devastation and your spirit's really low. Not only is everything destroyed, but as Bo described really well, everything gets moldy after that, and it's covered with this sticky mud. And the mud has been mixed with just all sorts of foul stuff that, the sewage treatment plant overflows also. Everything gets flooded. So it's really toxic stuff that you're dealing with there. We didn't just gut a house. Gutting the house refers to what Bo was saying about taking out the walls, the insulation, everything, but leaving the frame there. With this one house that we wound up building a new house, very, very small house for these people, this Cajun couple, we actually demolished half the house, planning to reuse the materials, and then realized that those materials had already been used 2 or even 3 times before, just over and over again. And after a while, the wood gets so splintery and twisted that it just didn't make sense for our time to try to reuse the wood. We were able to reuse some of the stuff, most of the windows and some of the roofing, some of the siding, but we had to buy new studs. And this house that we built, we wound up elevating about 5 feet off the ground, so that the next time it floods, not if, but when it does flood again, then at least they'll have a good chance of not being flooded out.
Do you think that much of the rebuilding, that people are thinking ahead, so that, preparation, I mean, hurricanes are frequent, in that part of the world.
And possibly getting more frequent since '95.
Is that right?
Oh yeah. It's a cycle. Now, you can't say why, but you go in several decades of low frequency, and then you get several decades of high frequency.
And so our global warming just is exacerbating
that cycle.
A cycle that's already
very
active.
Very possibly.
Oh, so do you think that more people are thinking in terms of how to be better prepared for the next times?
Well, we went through a neighborhood every time we drove. We were about 2 hours south of New Orleans. And to get from the church where we were camping out to our work sites, we would drive through this community where almost every house was elevated, not 5 feet, but a good 8 to 10 feet off the ground. And some people would apparently not use the space. Other people's made it into a carport, or one of the most creative I thought was a nice living area, not in other words, a closed, screened-in space that you could be in, but nothing permanent or very expensive down there, so that when the flood waters do come by again, then they'll be prepared for it.
So do those have a better, survival rate?
No doubt about it, unless we did see a lot of boats that were simply flipped out onto the land, and they'd come to rest anywhere. And if a boat comes to rest on your house, it doesn't matter how good your stilts are, you get smashed.
Photograph of a boat on top of a 2-story house.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, they had moorings loose and all of that. So did you see anything to do with the levees? Obviously, that was a big component here of what happened to cause the flooding.
Bo and I spent most of our time working, pounding nails, and also deconstructing, taking things apart. But we did have a chance to go out, and this was part of the focus of the trip, with the Corps of Engineers, to stand on the levees where they had broken. And we went to each of the major breaks and could see the construction they were doing. Now, levees are built of dirt, and that's what they were doing, was moving dirt. But there are different qualities of dirt. Dirt with a lot of clay in it tends to stick together. Dirt with a lot of sand in it tends to be easily moved, and that's what they're looking at now. There are 4 investigations going on as to why the levees failed. And only one of the serious breaches was caused by the levee being overtopped, the water going over the top. The other levees, the water never went over the top, but the hydrostatic force of the water pushing sideways pushed the flood wall, which is built on top of the levee, pushed that over. We saw this one area. It's interesting to see the different stages of failure, where there was one area where the levee was stressed so that the concrete is joined, and you have a gasket material in between of about a ½ inch, and that had been stretched out about 5 inches, but the levee held, the flood wall there held. In other places, the flood wall simply burst apart, got pushed over by a good 3-4 meters, and the water just flowed anywhere it wanted to. And in those areas, we didn't see demolished houses. All we saw were concrete slabs.
Oh, so
the house was somewhere else.
Washed.
Somewhere else in the parish. But in a lot of places, the houses were simply picked up and dropped. And it really looked like a war zone, except that fire was a very minimal part of it. It was simply destruction by wave action and by water. Not just wave action, but water picking it up and dropping it. There were cars, as Renette says, there were cars that were at all different angles. Something like 300,000 cars were submerged. When you submerge a car in salt water, this is in New Orleans again, this is not where we were working, we just went to New Orleans to try to understand what happened there. When you submerge a car for 3 weeks in salt water, there's nothing worth salvaging.
Yeah.
There's also something interesting. I had a fellow who survived World War II, was in it, and he said that he was in his home with his family, and the barometric pressure was so severe that they heard the homes around them exploding and the roofs dropping. And you actually see that where the homes just explode out and the roofs are dropped flat, and that's everywhere. And so they kept hearing their neighborhood blowing up, home after home. So he had to literally take his family, and I heard this story many times. All of a sudden, he had to run out into the hurricane, into the largest open space they could find, some in boats, some in cars, to escape their exploding homes.
Exploding homes.
Yeah.
While you were there, what kind of things were going on in your mind that could be about being prepared for emergencies? What could you bring back home here to folks in Nevada County or California, Northern California? I mean,
one of the things I'm asked is how long is it going to take them to rebuild? And people will guess 1 year, 2 years. The estimate right now is going to take 1 or 2 years to clean up, just to get rid of the massive amount of material, which is worthless. Now, as Bo said, a lot of it is very moldy, and it's dangerous mold there. So the take-home message for me is to be aware of where you're living. Gary Snyder talks about, being aware of where you are, having an identity with the land you're living on. And it's really that. And realize, we hear reports of people in Sacramento, in the Natomas area, not realizing that they could be under 20 feet of water. So, well, they weren't aware and they weren't told. And if you're not told something, I suppose you don't realize that you should investigate it. Obviously, here in Nevada County, we have a fire risk, fire danger. And we have to be aware of the fact that fire does tend to climb uphill. So if you're at the top of a ridge, you want to watch out.
We're also at risk of being an area where the evacuees would come, which happened, I think, in the mid-'80s when the valley was flooded. And I had a neighbor who had 40 people camping out on his front lawn. And we just had only a few weeks ago, too. So, we also have to be really aware of that we could be an area that, a town of 2,000 overnight can become 25,000. So that's something we really need to deal with because there's a lot of areas that would be flooded or earthquakes or, who knows.
It seems to me that one needs to, it's a massive thing to think about, both the preparedness for, when I think about fire danger in our county, I immediately think we should have all stone or brick houses, which we don't, which would be phenomenal expense to retrofit or people would not want to do. Although there certainly are measures people can do to make their houses fire safe, building the defensible space so that they're cleared, and can be protected. But I would expect that in our county, the need to know your neighbors and be able to help one another is going to have to be some part of our preparedness.
Just to know how to get out of the area. If there's a mudslide somewhere or fire, there's how many roads are there that can get us in and out? We just had mudslides there were people cut off from a certain area and they couldn't get back for a couple of days.
You really do want to know your neighbors in New Orleans, and they're talking about this now in Sacramento. There are small concentrations of old folks or disabled people that the authorities really don't know about or don't know to the extent that it's in the emergency plan, go to such and such a number on such and such a street and get these people out, that they'll have to start almost from scratch. For some reason, as I read in the newspaper, the Sacramento city government is being very stingy with the evacuation maps, that it's very difficult for people. They have to go down to the library, in other words, they're not being published.
Openly to find out where they would evacuate to in case of a flood or whatever in Sacramento.
Yeah. And they would not have to evacuate nearly as intensively or as much of a distance as people in New Orleans, which is so flat that you have to go a couple of 100 miles perhaps to get well above sea level. In Sacramento, you can probably go a few miles and you'd be on a ridge.
Well, and also, I met a woman who, she and her neighbors were all dealing with the fact that they were all packing themselves up and going, a good 100 or 200 miles away. And when they returned, they had all discovered that they had left behind an older man, a neighbor, and he perished in his home. Mm-hmm. And they did not think of checking on him. They thought somebody was taking care of him. So that whole neighborhood was dealing with the guilt of not taking care of this elderly man in his home.
Bo, I wonder, do you remember how each and every home, when we went through New Orleans, had an X spray painted on the front.
Mm-hmm.
And you remember what the numbers meant?
Oh, I remember one of the numbers on the bottom was the amount of deaths that were actually in the house. I don't recall the other numbers.
Yeah, the other numbers were, it was the date and the search team that was there. And as Bo said, on the bottom, it was the number of corpses they had found in the house.
And also, that reminds me, I think a lot of people should kind of look at this a little closer, because right in Sacramento, we kind of have the same danger if we were to be hit with a tornado, maybe. Every once in a while in California, you might have a tornado. And if that hit the Folsom Dam, we would have all that flooding. And if we look at it really closely to help the people in Louisiana, they'd probably be overjoyed to come help us when we need their help.
I think that the whole Katrina thing to me is a big litmus test for our humanity, and if we don't utilize it as a great teaching and learning tool for ourselves, we're actually missing out on a great opportunity. I mean, it's obviously terrible what happened there, but we really should go there and just be a part of it, see what happened, where the failures were, where the successes were, what things had to be put into place as soon as it happened, what people were scrambling for, what they had and didn't have. These are things that, I mean, we really have an incredible example of how things go wrong when you don't prepare.
Right.
And so it's a great teacher for us, and I think as a country and a nation and our government is not taking advantage of that.
I'd like to throw in, I know, Renette, you went with a church group. The trip that Bo and I went on was put together by the American Friends Service Committee, the AFSC. And it really seems to be NGOs, non-governmental organizations, especially connected with churches. But there are other people too who have their own organizations looking, for instance, at the affairs of Native Americans and needs of them in the Southeast, in Louisiana. And really, these smaller groups are really important. I encourage people to get in touch with AFSC or any other group that might be doing work there or work around the world for people who need help. I tend to lead myself towards the smaller organizations, the less visible ones, but they're doing an incredible amount, and sometimes it looks like they're doing a bit more than their share.
Sounds to me that what we see here is it's overwhelming for the governmental organizations. I mean, even as much planning or not that they did, we can't rely on government to take care of everything. It's we the people helping other people, and that's part of the heartening and heartbreaking, but the heartening story that you all are telling from your lives of going down to Katrina to help other people, to help the animals, and so on. Thank you. Thank you. My guests, this has been wonderful and interesting. I hope that a lot of folks take it to heart. Yeah.
Me too.
I'm Janaea Donaldson. Thank you for watching Peak Moment. Join us for next week's half-hour episode of Peak Moment. We'll be looking at how communities and individuals respond to a changing energy future. Peak Moment is produced by Alliance for a Post-Petroleum Local Economy, Apple of Nevada County, working to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels and to build a more self-reliant local economy.